be looking at prophecies of Jesus tonight. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at an Old Testament prophecy, and then we're going to look at where that prophecy was fulfilled in the New Testament, and then we'll sing a Christmas hymn that ties that prophecy together. So their common belief among many Bible commentators are that there are about 300 prophecies of Jesus in the Bible. So we're not going to be here until like New Year's Eve, so I'm not going to go through all the prophecies. We're not going to be looking at what I'm calling Messiah verses. These are verses in the Old Testament that pointed towards the Messiah. Those are prophecies about the coming Messiah, but what I want to do is I want to focus in about Jesus. Now, to give an example of a Messiah prophecy is Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So this is, by many, considered the first prophecy in the Bible about the coming Savior, the Redeemer, that he is going to crush Satan's head. But this is not specifically pointing to Jesus. So this is an example that is a prophecy, nothing wrong with it, but it's not one that I want to look at tonight. We're also not looking at the prophecies yet unfulfilled. So Jesus came in what we call the first advent when he was born as a baby. That's the first advent. That's why we have this advent season. And then there are some prophecies that are going to take place later in the millennium. Many years from now, when everything basically comes crashing down and Jesus will come riding back from heaven with, the white horses and his army coming with him. So those are yet in the future. We're not going to look at those prophecies either. We are going to be looking at prophecies that point specifically to Jesus. Prophecies that could only be fulfilled by one person that has ever lived or that ever would live. Those are the prophecies we're going to look at this evening. Now, once we establish these prophecies that are pointing specifically to Jesus, then we can look at all these other prophecies that we're not going to look at, and we'll see where they fit in place, where they could be general, but now that we know that Jesus was the prophesied Messiah, now we can see how that tied into his life. So the first song that I want to sing as we think about Jesus is "What Child Is This?" And like I said, you can be seated and we'll sing this song and then we'll talk more about prophecies. So the first prophecy we're going to look at is the virgin birth, and it was prophesied in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Now this word virgin, this does not mean just a young woman. Now, many people today, detractors of Christ, unbelievers, will say, well, actually that word in the Hebrew means young woman, not virgin. And so, therefore, that would not be a miracle of God. Well, whenever this term in the Hebrew, that's called Alma, whenever this term is used, it has always meant virgin. To give you an example, in the Old Testament, I'm just going to point out a couple of places, but there are others, that this word in Hebrew, Alma, was used. And the first one was Rebekah. When Isaac's servant went out to find him a wife in Genesis 24:16, they found Rebekah, which was termed a young woman, an Alma. And so if they were going to find a wife for Isaac and travel hundreds of miles looking for just the specific, perfect young woman, it's not going to be just any young woman. This is going to be a virgin. Things were different back then. This is what a betrothal would be, especially to a future head of a tribe, it would have to be a virgin. And then later, or earlier actually, but another verse is Exodus 2:8, when young woman was used to describe Miriam. Miriam was Moses' sister. She was 7 years old. Obviously, Alma, in this case, represented a virgin at 7 years old. And like I said, there were others. Well, what's interesting about that is the Septuagint translates the word Alma into Parthenos, which is Greek, meaning virgin. So what the Septuagint is, about 300 years before the birth of Christ, Alexander the Great conquered that whole part of the world. And Alexander the Great was Greek. And because he conquered that whole part of the world, for trade and for different purposes, governmental purposes, everybody basically spoke Greek in this part of the world back then. And so even though they were Hebrews, even though they were Jews, and even though they were still going to the synagogue, the common language was Greek. And so they said, we would like the Hebrew Testament scriptures in our language, which happened to be Greek. And so the word Septuagint means 70. So 70 Hebrew scholars got together, they were people that knew both Greek and Hebrew. They took the Hebrew scriptures and they translated into the common language at that time, Greek. When they did that, these Hebrew scholars, they took the word Alma, which was virgin, and they translated it into Parthenos, which is the Greek word for virgin. So when that word appeared, Hebrews understood that meant virgin. So when it comes out in the Greek, that's why it is translated virgin. So don't get confused with people saying, oh, it means young women. Even the Hebrews, even the Jews back in those days understood this. They understood Isaiah to say that a virgin would conceive, not just a young woman. It's not a miracle if a young woman conceives. So that was the prophecy. Isaiah 7:14. Where do we see this fulfilled? In Matthew 1:18 through 23. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Notice it says that she will conceive and give birth to a son. So first of all, we know that it's a son. It's a boy. So of all the people in this world that might have been the Messiah, take half of them out right there because they're females. So we know that the Messiah was to be a son. And then they are going to call him Emmanuel, God with us. Later, his miracles confirmed his divinity. This was only given to Jesus. Jesus is the only one who had miracles attested by the Jewish people saying, certainly this man comes from God. So that's where the God with us comes from. In John 3:2, Nicodemus says, Rabbi, we know, and talking to Jesus, Nicodemus said, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. So even the Jews recognized that this was a person from God. In other words, God with us. So that's how that name came to be. So we'll sing, O come, Emmanuel. Emmanuel. Also, that he would be born in Bethlehem. That was one of the prophecies. They were going to prophesy exactly where the Messiah was going to come from. Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, of ancient times. You see, there were two Bethlehems. The other one was in Galilee. So it mentions here in Micah 5:2, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah. So even though Israel had two Bethlehems, the other one being in Galilee, not only did they pick out what the name of the village was going to be, but which one there was going to be. Of the two Bethlehems, this was going to be the one Bethlehem Ephratah. The population in that time that Jesus was born of Bethlehem Ephratah was about 300 people. So I would guess that back in Micah's time, it was even smaller than that. But yet he prophesied from this little teeny tiny town of 300 at the time of Jesus that that's where the Messiah would come. There were probably only, people who have studied these things have said there were probably only 6 or 7 children in that village at that time. So now, for somebody to be the Messiah, we know that it has to be a male, and now they have to be born in this particular town. Even now, today's population, it's about the population of South Portland. Bethlehem Ephratah today is about the population of South Portland, about 19,000. And so where it says that this particular child that's going to be born in Bethlehem Ephratah isn't just an average child born in that city, you can tell that this is a messianic prophecy because it says the origins are from old, from ancient days. What child can you say that about? Only one that is divine. Only one that has always been from ancient times, from old. So they not only predicted that it was going to be a virgin birth, but also where this was going to be taking place, and that was in Bethlehem. Where do we see this prophecy fulfilled? Matthew 2:1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, Judea was like the state, Ephratah was like the region, like New England would be. And so it's still Judea. It's still not Bethlehem, the one up near Galilee. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi came from the east and came to Jerusalem. So Bethlehem, the word Bethlehem means house of bread. John 6:35, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. So from the house of bread came the bread of life. In other words, if you take part in Jesus, which we have during communion, then you will be part of the eternal destiny. Our song for this one is O Little Town of Bethlehem. Our next prophecy is that the Messiah would be presented gifts. Psalm 72:5. May he endure as long as the sun, as long as the moon, through all generations. That tells us that this is a prophecy about the Messiah. Who else, other than somebody being divine, is going to endure as long as the sun and the moon or through all the generations? So it has to be a divine person that this psalm is talking about. And then it goes on to say, may the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring tribute to him. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts. We find this fulfilled in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 11. During the time of King Herod, Magi from the east, remember they were coming from Tarshish and Sheba and Seba, those are to the east of Bethlehem. During the time of the King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Let's take a look at these gifts. First of all, there is gold. Gold is representative of Jesus the King. Kings wore crowns of gold. So this represents Jesus being in his kingly role. Now also, other people have said how some other things tie in. I hadn't heard this before. Studying for this is the first time I've ever heard this, but I think it's pretty interesting. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But the gold that the Magi presented to them very well could have paid for the stable where they were born. And then, if you remember, Jesus had to flee. Mary and Joseph and Jesus had to flee down into Egypt. And the gold that the Magi gave them certainly would have paid for that travel and for them to live on until they were able to come back. Not only was gold, but there was also frankincense. Now, frankincense talks about Jesus in his godly role, that he is God, because this is incense. You are only to light incense to those that you are worshiping, and you are only to worship the God of Israel. And so by worshiping Jesus, they are recognizing that Jesus is God. The frankincense gives off a pleasant smell. That's what's used in the worship services, a pleasing aroma going up to God. This also would help the smell of the stables. So that would help in that sense. And finally, the myrrh. The myrrh represents the atoning death that Jesus is going to give his life for. So myrrh, if you remember at the resurrection, there was also myrrh dealt with when they prepared the body. That is an ointment. And so that ointment, as you know, with babies, and they have to cut the umbilical cord, they have to put ointment on it, so that could be used for the baby Jesus as well. So the gifts came from kings from afar, and that was shown in Matthew 2, verses 1 and 11. So the song is, "We Three Kings of Orient Are." The Messiah would be in the line of Jesse. Isaiah 11:1 says, "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord." So the coming Messiah would be found in the line of Jesse. Genealogies are very important to Jews. They would establish his right to rule. Everything was run by the genealogies. It was very important to the Jewish people to know who your fathers and grandfathers were on down the line. It established the right to be the ruler over Israel. So coming from Jesse was very important. By the way, Matthew is the apostle to the Jews. So Matthew specifically has written his gospel to be read and understood by those of the Jewish faith. Matthew 1, verses 1 and 6, continue talking about this genealogy, this line, and they said, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham, and Jesse, the father of King David." Matthew 3:16 says, "As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, 'This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased.'" Remember, the prophecy from Isaiah said that the Spirit would be upon him. The Spirit would be upon him. And we find out in Matthew 3:16 that sure enough, the Spirit of God descending like a dove alighted on Jesus. In nobody else in recorded history has had the Spirit of God light upon him. It's not recorded anywhere, but it is recorded about Jesus. And Isaiah said the Spirit would be upon him. And certainly the Spirit was upon Jesus. We'll sing, "It Came Upon a Midnight Clear." So we've looked at a number of prophecies tonight. We've looked at the prophecies in Isaiah and Micah, those of the Old Testaments. Then we've skipped forward thousands of years or hundreds of years from those prophecies to when Jesus was born. And we saw how they were filled precisely only by Jesus, only by somebody born, when he was born, where he was born, and how he was born. So those are some pretty striking prophecies that only can be presented to Jesus. Now, there are three other prophecies found in Matthew 2, and this is a teaser. You're going to have to come back on Sunday for those prophecies. So I am done for this evening, but there are three more prophecies found in Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to look at those on Sunday. First of all, his escape to Egypt, prophesied in Hosea 11:1 and fulfilled in Matthew 2:13 through 15. We'll also look at the prophecy about children being slaughtered. That's told about by Jeremiah in chapter 31, verse 15, and we will look forward to the New Testament fulfillment in Matthew 2:7 and 18. And the final prophecy that we will look at on Sunday is that Jesus will be called a Nazarene. Isaiah 11, verses 1 through 5, and also Isaiah 53:3, and then that will be fulfilled, we will find in Matthew 2:23. So that concludes the prophecy teaching for tonight. What I'd like to do is invite you to stand as we sing our final hymn. And this is going to be Silent Night. We do the candles after Silent Night?
As we do it.
As we do it. Okay, so what we're going to do, so hold on there, Mitch. So we're not going to sing just yet. We're going to light our candles. So you should have got a candle. Was there anybody that didn't get a candle? Richard, looks like Richard's got everybody. Good job. So we're going to take our candle.
Very quietly while we light our candles.
Okay, so what we're going to do, I want to give you a lesson on how to light your candle. So what we'll do is we will have, I guess Marion will start on that side, I'll start on this side by lighting our candles. When we go to light the next person's candle, the person whose candle is lit should stay upright. The person lighting it leans their candle in, so that way it's not dripping. And then you pass yours on, and the one that's giving the light always holds it straight up. The one receiving the light is the one that tips. So we will do that, and then when we are ready, we will start with Silent Night. Yeah, and form a circle around the pews.
Take mine.